can change.
We were introduced to our guest today as a superhuman, and you're going to find out why that's true. Kim Jung, right here with us. Kim, superhuman. Wow, but you really are. I read your resume and I was just worn out reading it. You're a West Point grad, you're in MIT, you're an officer, you're like an academic genius, and you started a business in Afghanistan that's still going.
Stan, I wouldn't say I'm superhuman at all. I'm still just trying to make it every day like everybody else. And everything that you mentioned, I have to be really honest, and I just felt like the right person at the right time in the right place. And it wasn't just myself doing any of it, whether it was at West Point or MIT or Rumi Spice, we did it together as a team.
Well, let's go back just a little bit then. Tell us about West Point. You know, not a whole lot of women go to West Point.
That's true. I think the percentage it was about 10 to 15% when I was there, and I think they've upped it to over 20 to 25, maybe 30, I think. So a lot more women now go to the academy, which is great.
Why did you go?
When I was in high school, I was the kind of person who wanted to go to like the Shaolin temple and learn Kung Fu and just eat white rice for a whole summer or something like that. And I'd always been enamored by this idea of proving oneself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And West Point, like I had never heard of the place before, and somebody's older brother was going to go, and someone was like, oh, that's where you go to, you know, you're going to go to the army, you become a military officer, you lead soldiers, you learn to become a leader, and it's really hard. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's the place for me. I want to go there. When
you told your parents that you wanted to go to a military academy, did they say, oh yes, that's great?
No, my parents definitely did not dream for me to go to a military academy. I think that, and they knew, and they were right, that I was so young that I didn't really fully realize where I was going, as in afterwards there's a commitment to serve in the military, and I'd be stationed somewhere overseas, I'd be deployed, I could die, you know, all these risks that young 17-year-olds just don't think about.
And you did some of those things, which you were deployed, you became an officer, you went overseas. What did you do?
When we were overseas, we were a route clearance platoon, so we were looking for roadside bombs or IEDs.
You were looking for them?
We were looking for them because we would have to clear the roads for those hazards, or if there were any ambushes or assaults along the road, so that logistics patrols or infantry patrols or any other type of patrols of NATO forces could come in behind us and be not fearful that there would be anything, you know, impeding their way or attacking them on the road.
And that was in Afghanistan?
That was in Afghanistan, yeah. We were in Ghazni province, which is near the eastern border, near the Pakistani border.
You know, there's just nothing that sounds good about that.
No, it was great, actually. My platoon and I made friends with the local Afghan National Army troop that was stationed there as well, in a local Afghan base. And we would do joint missions together, and I remember we would we would stop at some towns, and a lot of our friends and family would send us, you know, candy or pens and pencils and notebooks for the kids, the local Afghan kids. So we would hand those out, and we would also, I remember there was this one guy who was making ice cream, and he also had these like little fried, like, I don't know, I have no idea if they were onions or something like that. But anyway, we bought some of those, we bought some ice cream, it was delicious. Some of us had some indigestion after, because I don't think we're used to the local Afghan food, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, your relationship with the Afghanis, how did that work? I mean, were they thrilled to see an American, or were they just thrilled to see somebody that wasn't going to try to oppress them?
I think that might be a loaded question, because, you know, you could ask the same question to a bunch of Americans, right, and think, what would you think if an Afghan person came here? And I think depending on where you're, you know, which American from which part of the country, where their political leanings are, what they're doing in life, their socioeconomic status, they would all have different reactions. And so I would say the same things about Afghans. Depending on who the American is and what they're here to do, I think, you know, it's a complex human relationship, and if anyone has more of an emphasis on direct human relationships at the local level, it's Afghans. It's not to say that they're not nationalistic or they don't care about Afghanistan as a whole, but they care more about their families, their immediate friends. That bond of loyalty that they have with their friends and family is much stronger than any sort of political leaning or national ties to anything. So there's a phrase called wasita, which is an Afghan phrase, and it's like your reputation, your commitment, and your connection to the community. And you build up wasita, and that is your power and your influence and your goodwill with everybody else. And so Ruby Spice always strove to build up wasita with our communities and them with us.
Did you meet any of the bad guys? Did you meet any of the Taliban?
I don't think we did. There was a couple of checkpoints that we've gone through where, because I'm a woman and I was traveling with one of my farmers and I was just in the back of the vehicle, the van, nobody gave me a second look. I think if I were blonde and blue-eyed, it'd be a little bit different, but.
Well, now, wait a minute. You were driving in a truck, an Afghani farmer was driving you around?
This was one of the times that we were there in Afghanistan, and we went out to the fields, the Saffron Fields. By the way, it's really gorgeous. It's purple flowers everywhere. It blooms once a year for about 2-3 weeks. And sometimes Afghanistan can be really stark and dry and mountainous. And so you turn the corner and you see this big field of purple flowers, and it's just gorgeous. Anyway, we went out there to see them, and I was traveling in the back of one of my farmers' vans.
Oh. Well, that's interesting. When you say one of your farmers, what does that mean?
Oh, just one of the farmers that we work with. We now work with over 300 farmers.
Oh, this is in Rumi Spice.
With Rumi Spice.
Oh, wow. And we are going to get to that, but I want to know a little bit more about the Afghani people.
Okay.
Did you get a chance to meet some of the Afghani women?
I did. When I was out of my platoon leader time and I was working with the provincial reconstruction teams, I got a chance to go out and interface directly with Afghan women. So what we were trying to do as NATO forces was we were meeting with a village of Afghan women, and they had to ask permission from each of their husbands and fathers to be able to have this meeting. And they all gathered together. They made this amazing meal, and we all sat down, cross-legged, and we all ate with our right hand. And we had homemade bread, and we had lamb, and we had and rice, and it was so good. And I remember afterwards, they kept telling us to eat until we just couldn't eat anymore, and they were cleaning up the food, and every single grain of rice on the ground they made sure they picked up, and they would eat it or make sure that it wasn't wasted. And it just broke my heart seeing that, because I grew up in a family of immigrants in Chinatown, Los Angeles, and my parents never waste food, and I get that.
You said you ate with your right hand.
Why is that significant? It's just a culture.
Just a cultural thing?
Yeah, it's a cultural
thing. Now, in terms of your dealings with the Afghani women, were they clearly subservient, clearly second class to the men?
That is a tough question, but I would say yes. But that's also to say that that's not necessarily, there's roles for Afghan women, and they have a very specifically defined role. That is, they are the head of the family household, in the inside sphere of the family, where it's intimate and it's private. That is where you find the Afghan women. They uphold the reputation and the honor of the family. So the Afghan woman, in that respect, is very honored and revered and loved. But they're also, for example, we can only hire either all Afghan women or all Afghan men, but we cannot be mixing. And
why was that?
Because in Afghanistan, they don't mix genders unless you're in the same family.
There's just not a work together. Is that because of fear of men?
Impropriety.
Just impropriety. Interesting. Did the women wear any kind of religious-based clothing?
Yeah, and it's not for them. It's not religious. It's what they wear every day. So yes.
It's not religious for them. It's the clothing that they wear over their heads, or make sure that they don't get dust in their eyes, right?
No, they wear, every single woman in Herat, pretty much in Afghanistan, wears a hijab, which is a head covering, if not a burqa, When you go to the more rural areas, all the women wear burqas, where it's fully covered.
But that's religious, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is actually religious. It's just that it's tied in together. Most people in Afghanistan are Muslim. Most.
Did you have to wear that as well?
Yeah, I wore a hijab. So I just covered my head, my hair, and I made sure I wore clothing that was, not too tight or revealing and covered everything. It's just culturally respectful.
But was that part of the uniform as well when you were there in a military capacity?
No. With the military, it's almost like, even as an American businesswoman or as a military person, it's like I'm a separate being. So I'm
Were you
foreigner.
respected?
So some of the other Afghan platoon leaders wouldn't necessarily want to talk to me at all. And they would just talk to my platoon sergeant because they knew I was a woman. And there were other ones who wouldn't stop talking to me and wanted to talk about all sorts of things. I even got a marriage proposal at some point in a village. Or they just talk to me as an equal too. So there's just all different,
Oh, okay.
all different walks of life.
You talked about saffron. But before we get to saffron, we know, here in the United States, or at least we believe that a big part of the gross national product comes from opium. Did you see that as well? Is that how people were making money?
I don't know if I could see that necessarily. I do know that some of our farmers switched over from growing poppy to saffron, which is really, really great. And the reason that they would sell poppy is because it gives them income.
Yeah.
And they would sell it to the Taliban mostly, who would refine it into opium. So it's not even that the farmers are getting the income from opium, they're getting income from poppy. And so poppy actually is 7 times less of an income for farmers than saffron. So saffron is way more, and it's really great for that.
And then you were part of a group, or you led the group that started Rumi Spice.
Yes, it was me, Emily, Keith, Carol, and a couple of other people who were also with us at Harvard Business School.
Oh my gosh, I forgot. We only talked about West Point, but Harvard Business School and now MIT. We'll get there.
Yeah.
This is part of the superhuman part. But let's talk about Rumi Spice. So what is it, and why did you start it, and how's it going, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think I realized that you asked me some questions and it actually related back to my military experience, and I wove in a couple of Rumi Spice stuff in there too. So
same human though, right?
It's still me, I guess, and my experiences.
So Rumi Spice and the saffron, you talked about the saffron and the beautiful fields that they were. What is saffron?
Saffron is the stigmas of the crocus flower, Crocus sativus. And it blooms once a year, as I mentioned before, and it has crocine and saffronel, and those two properties give it a very fragrant taste. It's good for cooking for both savory and sweet, so it's in a lot of Indian desserts, it's in bouillabaisse, it's in a lot of French cuisine as well. I've made a bunch of cream sauces with saffron, and goes really well.
I understand it's pretty expensive.
It is pretty expensive.
So then you started a business around saffron.
Yeah, so what happened was Emily and I were at Harvard Business School, and they asked us there, what will you do with your one wild and precious life? And I wasn't so sure I wanted to go into finance like everybody else. Nothing wrong with that, but maybe just not for me. And we were Skyping with our other co-founder, Keith, who was in the Army still at that point, and he was in Afghanistan, and he was telling us about this farmer named Haji Yosef, who was trying to sell saffron, but was not able to really connect to the market. And it wasn't going anywhere. And it was really through like government organizations or military organizations. And I thought to myself, I didn't go to Harvard Business School to like just get rich and lead a cushy life. I have a great education, or I'm about to get one, so that I can do great things in the world. And I know Emily felt the same way, Keith felt the same way, Carol as well, and Ben at the time too. And we decided to just start this business because we remembered our times in Afghanistan, because all of us were, a lot of us were officers in the military before this. And we actually also had a Marine who had also been in Afghanistan and had seen firsthand about growing cannabis.
When you say the word Afghanistan, there's a warmth. You liked it there, didn't you?
Yeah, Afghanistan, the people are amazing. They're very hospitable. They're loyal. They really, I feel, have the right values in mind. And sometimes when I think about the United States and our values, and we work ourselves to the ground, and we sometimes don't appreciate the little things, or we're super consumerism. We're just mega consumers.
We are that, that's for sure.
Yes.
So then in terms of the Rumi Spice, was it a business that you went back with your group and you went back and worked the fields yourself, or was this a business then that local Afghanis were involved in as well?
Both, but really in the Afghanistan part, we're not trying to micromanage anything. I'm not a hero. We're not superheroes. We're just trying to work together with other people to get things done. So what can we add to the table? Well, we're in America and we can sell. We can meet a lot of chefs. We can go to grocery stores. We can meet the buyers. And we can sell saffron and saffron-related products to other people, because that's what the farmers need, right? They need a place to sell their saffron. Going back to that one story, so we were Skyping with Keith, and then that summer I decided to get a ticket, buy myself a ticket to Afghanistan, and my entrepreneurship professor from Harvard Business School went with me, and we met up with Keith, 11 other farmers, and we negotiated with them, and I brought back our first saffron. But I remember when it came into the room and you could just smell it, and it was such an amazing smell, so fresh. But it came in a cardboard box wrapped in string. And so you know that's just, it's not that it's a problem, but that's not going to sell in the United States, and how are you going to make that happen? But there's a lot more to it. We didn't just repackage it. We had to do a lot of food safety. We had to stand up a whole processing facility. We had to get all the import-export regulations. We have to package it the right way. We have to, so we were really, really vertically integrated. And our Afghan partners were truly our partners, because, we didn't try to impose any American, ways of doing things, except for maybe the food safety part in Afghanistan. We had to work together to figure out what was best, and that would work for their culture and work for us. We get things done, we sell the saffron, the farmers are our partners, capitalism works, and it's great.
When I think of farming here in the United States, I think of big machinery, and the machinery comes in and harvests all the plants, and then there's some other machinery that takes and divides everything out. Is that the way it was done there?
We don't have any machinery. It's all handpicked by Afghan women.
Wow.
Because it's so delicate. Every stigma you need to hand pick.
Oh, really?
So there's no machinery.
That's why it's expensive, huh?
Yes. There's a drying machine. That's about it.
Are the women in Afghanistan able to work and make money in that, separate and apart from whatever they do with their family?
A lot of them, well, if they weren't working there, they might be working other places, but they might just be at home. And we actually really went after the Afghan Widows Association in Herat, which is the Herat Widows Association, so we hired a bunch of widows.
There are stories from other developing countries where women become economic powers. And is that what you are seeing in Afghanistan? Are women becoming economically powerful themselves at a time where they wouldn't necessarily work before?
So these Afghan women were paid directly by us, and they would bring home their wages, and these women would either have to hand over their wages to their husbands or fathers, or I guess they keep them, but they usually don't. They usually hand them over. But that's actually a really crucial step, because instead of, before we went there, a lot of these Afghan women were still doing this job, still picking the saffron stigmas, but they're doing it in the home, and they're not getting paid. They're not getting a dollar value assigned to their contribution to the family economy. Mm-hmm. So when they are getting paid by a separate entity and bring home those wages, there's a dollar value assigned, and that's really important.
So you got the company started. Is it still going?
It's still going.
How's it doing?
6 years now. 6 years, which is crazy. It's doing really well. We're nationally distributed. We're in all Whole Foods, and we were in Shark Tank at some point. We had Mark Cuban, Home Shopping Network. I had to do a bunch of Home Shopping Network episodes.
Did you really? Okay, I got to ask you, how was that like?
It's It was great. I had to smile a lot. Yeah, and but those guys are professionals. I mean, they know exactly what they're doing. They know they know their audience. They can forecast exactly how many units are going to be sold. They got it down to a science.
So in terms of Rumi Spice, it's RUMI, and we're going to make sure that the website's up on the screen. I mean, can people just order it online as well?
Yes, you can order Rumi Spice online. You can order on Amazon. You can go to some of your local Michelin star restaurants and it'll be there, depending on which city. So we have a lot of restaurants in New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, even a couple places in Texas.
Now, a saffron field, how large is that?
There's no typical field. It's just if they decide to make that plot of land, which is usually a jarab, which is like half an acre, they can make that whole plot of land any crop that they would want.
What else is grown there from a cash standpoint, besides saffron and poppy? We know is still there.
Yes, so there's poppy, but there's also wheat and barley. Fruits grow really well in Afghanistan. When I was deployed as a platoon leader, we were in the Wardak province as well, and that province is where apples came from. So they have the best apples.
Really?
Apple
We're in
orchards
Washington
everywhere.
State right now, so we'd probably argue with you about that.
I'm sure both produce great apples.
But you said that the apples were good. I guess what I'm really getting at is that is there an economy that can develop in Afghanistan so that violence is not a part of their society?
Absolutely, Stan, and that's exactly what we're trying to get to at Rumi Spice. That's our mission, is we are trying to prove to the world that Afghanistan is part of the international economy. It has every right to be there. It has products, it has people, we can make connections, and that's really what brings us all together so that we don't have to be sending over troops overseas to fight a war that we don't need to be fighting at all, when people are connected by other means.
Okay, you opened up the door to fight a war that we don't need to be fighting. I mean, you were a soldier.
Yeah, so if I'm a soldier, if anyone can say that, it would probably be me and other soldiers. You know, life is complicated, right? So I'm glad, you know, I mentioned before when I was 17, I joined the Army, I didn't think about any of this stuff. And I was thinking about serving my country, but at that point it was just like a nebulous idea, right? And really know what that meant. Things can take, when you really want to get something done, it's not so black and white. And I think, especially being back in an academic environment, I feel like people really see things as black and white. But when you actually get down to it, you need to get your hands dirty. And you can't understand things and truly love them and understand how to change them unless you're really there on the ground, doing things with people, seeing the other side, seeing other perspectives, and actually holding those other perspectives as well.
A mutual friend of ours and a former Army Ranger himself talks about peace through business.
Yes.
And I think you do too.
Yes. Or if you're talking about Griff, then
yes, I am.
we are so on the same page about that. And Griff was one of our mentors, and he really took us under his wing because his business was there before ours. And I remember talking with him on the phone and him giving me lots of advice, and we were really inspired by what he did. And we were kind of modeling what we did along the same lines as what he was doing, except in a different capacity.
Well, as an American and a capitalist, I look at difficult countries and I say, you know, if you just had a job and you could feed your family and, you know, you could watch a dumb television show or something like that, then you wouldn't want to go pick up a gun and shoot somebody.
Exactly.
Is it that simplistic? Is that too simple, or is that right?
I mean, the world is both simple and it's complicated, right? Because I think on a lot of different levels, yes, I think that is the root of a lot of terrorism. There's a lot of economic reasons for why somebody would choose to lay a bomb out in the road. And there's also ideology as well. So it's definitely not there's so many different factors into why there is war. But part of me, from a philosophical perspective, believes it's something that just very much a part of what it means to be human.
But from what you could see, why would someone in Afghanistan go and put a bomb out? I mean, for you.
So we wear a uniform, right? And so we represent all of the US and maybe even NATO forces in general. And so if somebody from the US forces has like messed up in some way, like they promised, there's lots of ways that you could mess up. So you align yourself with the wrong guy, or you promise a contractor this, but you don't follow through on your promises because you return back to the United States and someone else deploys in your stead to take your job. And that person has no idea of what promises that you had made to somebody else. When you break a promise in Afghanistan, it's a big deal. And that's why somebody would decide to fight against you.
So are we better off militarily? Are we better off as a country just to not be there militarily?
I'm not qualified to answer that. I don't
Okay.
think a lot of people are.
No, I'm certainly not, that's for sure. And I don't know that. While you were there, did you meet people from other countries that possibly could have been fighting you, such as an Iranian or an Iraqi or a Pakistani?
Possibly fighting us?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I met a couple of Iranians because at Rumi Spice we were right across the border from Iran.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's fair to say that just because of someone's nationality that they would automatically fight us. I actually don't think that's the case at all for most people.
So
in general,
is it like-
nationality or not.
Is it like Rodney King time? Can't we all just get along? If somebody were to say that in Afghanistan, I mean, is there a reason to fight? I guess that's my question. I just don't understand.
They're not the ones fighting. They're just the ones who happen to be hosting the war. It's on their home soil, and that sucks. For the terrorists who are not there's a different power dynamic struggle over there, right? There's warlords, there's the Taliban, there's there's Haqqani network. There's all sorts of bad people, but there's all sorts of bad people in the United States as well. We just deal with it differently.
We're almost out of time and we got to go, so I'm going to ask an easy question as we end. 5 years from now, what are you going to look back on? What are you going to be doing?
That is what I'm struggling with right now. But to go back to it, what would you do with your one wild and precious life, which is from Mary Oliver? And I never want to compromise on that. And so one thing I would say is, I have no idea why people they actually deep down, for some reason, really try to maximize money. And it's literally just a means to an end. Like, you have limited time in this world. If I told you had $1,300 left in your bank account and only could go down, you would be really, really careful about how you use that. But if I told you you had 1,300 weeks left to live, which is about that for my age, and it only goes down, how would you spend each of those weeks? So if anything, it's like the value of your time and where you spend your time, what makes you happy, that it's the most important.
Kim Jung, superhuman, thank you very much.
Very nice to meet you. Thank you so much, Stan.